What does the autumn statement really mean for the construction industry? I'm Sarah Dennis, data editor of Construction News, here with Glenigan's economics director, Allan Wilén, to find out. Hi, Allan.
Hello.
One of the most notable parts of the autumn statement this year is that GDP growth was revised upward for the first time in 14 years. What impact do you think this will have on the construction industry?
I think it's both welcome and significant. The OBR has now increased its forecast for next year to 2.4% against 1.8% in its budget forecast last March. I think that's particularly important for the construction industry. If you look back over the last 30 years or so, you've needed a 2% rise in GDP to get any real growth in construction output. So the fact that we've now got a forecast above that 2% threshold has got to be good news for construction.
How much of an impact will this year's autumn statement really have on construction? For example, we've all been talking about housing this year. What were the talking points from the Chancellor's announcements that will affect the sector? It's
interesting. There were very few specific measures in the autumn statement that directly impact on construction. But you're right, housing has been a key issue for the government over the last few years, and the Chancellor effectively reiterated the fact in his autumn statement. He announced a number of specific measures in his speech, but they're both relatively sort of long to medium term issues. The first is he's found £1 billion over the next 6 years to help unlock sites that are ready for housing development. He expects that to release some 250,000 extra homes over that period. And that's starting from next year. They've identified 9 sites across England, particularly in Manchester and Leeds apparently, which they expect to hopefully release some 27,000 units for development. So that's got to be good news. The other factor he announced in the autumn statement itself was additional money, about £150 million a year for local authorities to fund new affordable housing. But again, that starts from 2015-16 onwards, so there's a little bit of a delay in that. Interestingly, though, there were a number of measures that were perhaps tucked away in the accompanying releases. Again, there was very much supply-side reforms rather than just hard cash. One of the most interesting ones really comes back to the new homes bonus that's available to local authorities. They're planning to try and rein that in a little bit, and basically any developments that go through at appeal stage won't be eligible for the grant funds for local authorities. That seems to be an interesting move by the government. They're really trying to make sure that perhaps local authorities, at least in their eyes, are a little bit more politically courageous and are willing to approve schemes themselves rather than letting valid schemes go to appeal with the additional cost and delay that involves.
But there wasn't any certainty about what's going to happen when Help to Buy finishes either. Do you think this will impact on future growth in housing?
The key will be whether the housing market has become self-sustaining in its recovery at that point. Currently, the funding is supposed to last into 2016, but given current rates of use, it could actually be before that. So we're going to have to watch that closely. Interestingly, just a couple of weeks ago, the Bank of England withdrew the funding for lending scheme. It's all now being directed away from the mortgage support towards businesses. And I think both the Treasury and the bank will be watching that closely over the coming months to see what impact that has on housing market activity, and really trying to interpret what impact the ending of the Help to Buy scheme will have as a result of that, and whether any sort of supporting measures need to be put in place. Certainly, I think the government will be reluctant to have a faltering in the housing market just ahead of the next general election.
And were there any other measures that may prove worthwhile for the industry? Would the retail sector, for example, given that it has struggled, benefit from the announcements around high street occupancy?
Whilst consumer confidence is now improving, retailers and the high streets are still facing a lot of structural change now, both from changing shopping patterns and, for example, the rise of online retailing. So the Chancellor's announcement that he's providing extra support for the retail sector, particularly for small premises, in terms of rebates for existing premises and also for occupants taking on new unoccupied properties, has got to be good news. And it could be good news for retail construction as well, encouraging more refurbishment and fit-out work in that sector. I mean, moving away from the retail side, though, there's some other good news in terms of the higher education sector, where the Chancellor has announced that he's going to raise the current cap on the student numbers by 30,000 in 2014-15 and remove it entirely the following year. If you look back over the last few years, the higher institutions have been an important source of construction activity, and this sort of move really should help to encourage further investment both by the institutions themselves but also by the private sector investing in more new student accommodation.
Thanks very much, Allan. Some really interesting points there to take away.
Thank you.
For the full analysis of the Autumn Statement's effect on construction and reaction from the industry, visit glenigan.com and cmplus.co.uk. You can, of course, also follow us on Twitter @cmplus and @Glenigan for all the latest updates in the construction industry.